Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second episode of the ABL podcast with me, Colton Holzapple, and my guest today is my good friend Jake Austin. Jake, how you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem, man. I'm just excited to have a conversation with you and discuss things. And I was trying to talk about this with my brother yesterday, but I also feel like you're one of the people I talk to a lot where we have this amazing phone call, this discussion, and then at the end, I'm like, damn, I really wish that we had recorded that or shared that with somebody because we usually get into some pretty good topics.
Yeah, we certainly jump around, cover the whole spectrum, for sure.
Yeah.
Let's tell everyone how we met.
So I met Jake. Basically, we met at an airport in Rome, and we both went to the same school in Colorado, and we both signed up for the same study abroad program last year to go to Perugia, Italy. And essentially, I met him for the first time at the airport in Rome because we were both in the same study abroad program. And I was like, "Oh, hey, what?" Yeah, and we figured out we were living in the same apartment together, studying abroad, and we just met at the airport. So I sat by him on the bus, and then I proceeded to talk to him for the next 3 hours about how Aquaman was the best movie of the of the year. And I think he
You
knew
know
at
what I
that
remember
moment.
most about that was, uh, Colton, you were wearing a snapback hat with the South Park characters across it, and I was like, that's quite the article of clothing to bring to Italy. And you put it in our closet in our apartment in Bruges and never wore it for the rest of the term. Somehow I just remember that perfectly. That hot bus, exhaustion, jet lag, and you talking my ear off about Aquaman.
That night was insane. It was we we were all delirious from just being so tired, and then they forced us to stay awake. They said, "Don't take a nap, stay awake," and we'd all been awake for a really long time. We're all jet lagged, and the bus ride was awful. So I was just trying to distract myself from how awful it was by talking with you and weirding you out, making you think that I guess confirming to you that I was a huge nerd. But we got back to the hotel room, and I remember as the night went on, I became more and more absurd, and like I just my filter goes away when I get too tired, and I remember just like talking to you guys, my first impression with you guys, and with you and the other guys that we went abroad with, and just it being it was a hell of a first day, I'd just say.
Yeah, it was. I think it was super valuable though, because you and the other guys we ended up rooming with were not really typical to the types of friends I'd had in college so far at all. And that's not an insult. It's actually a good thing to stretch your comfort zone and make friends with people that you wouldn't otherwise, because that group of five guys who were completely different in most every single way became tight as brothers in months, just months.
Yeah, me, you, Tony, Zach, and Max. We were like family out there, and the first day I wasn't really when we were all hanging out. I was like, okay, how long is this gonna last? I like hanging out with these guys, but we literally just stayed best friends the whole time, and we're still all best friends, and we're still all planning to meet up with each other this summer and hang out. And I'm really excited for that. The best part I think about the group we had was we weren't all the same. We all had different personalities, but we were all able to hold an intellectual discussion, and we were all very intelligent and very well spoken in our own fields in our own ways. And we brought these ideas, and we would just have these amazing discussions with each other, and we were just, I mean, from anything from politics to religion to the sciences. We were just able
History.
to, yeah, history. We were just able to have these conversations in this, like, yeah, in this historic area, this place that was burned down by the Romans and somehow still survived in 300 BC, and the streets are literally the same streets people have been walking down for thousands of years, and we're kind of just brought back in time to like the foundation of Western civilization, and we're all there just exploring these pre and post Enlightenment Western values together and having a great time too.
It's true. Yeah, I really think that travel is so good for people's perspective in every way. Just to get out of your personal comfort zone, to struggle with a foreign language, to make friends with people from halfway across the world, or to make a friend from the same town who you only met halfway across the world. These are all things that are very good for the mind and mental intelligence. Not saying that people who can't travel are not smart, but it's just an opportunity that I would suggest anybody who has that opportunity to take it, because I really felt like a different person in April of last year compared to January.
It was probably, to me, it was probably the most transformational thing. That whole year for me was super transformational, but I remember that's really one night out in Milan was really the night I just totally changed my life and started this new path. And the environment that I was in is, I would argue, is what allowed me to do that. And being with you guys and kind of having this camaraderie and companionship that I honestly never had growing up. I never had that like childhood friend. I mean, I had a few, but ended up not going well, and they weren't even people I wanted to hang out with eventually. And but I was not like close with them, and I couldn't have these intellectual conversations, and it didn't really feel as authentic. But when I met you guys, when we met the crew, it was like I was being exposed to this thing that I've always wanted, was these group of guys that I could just get along with and converse with and have intellectual discussion with, that weren't necessarily my family, that that I don't know what it's a sense of like camaraderie that I think people need, that social interaction. And especially I think it's unique among men to have this specific type of camaraderie I'm talking about. And women are very social and they have their friends too. I'm not saying that they don't, but I think that the specific type that men have when it's just a group of men interacting together is like very special and very unique. And it's honestly hilarious, some of the some of the things that would happen, and we would laugh so much and we'd have such a good time. It's just, but what an amazing experience. I feel like I really became a man when I was abroad. Like, I think that was when I decided to step out of the shoes of the boy who I was and really take up the mantle of responsibility and practicing these things. And it's not like a switch turning. You can't just flip a switch and say, "Oh, you're a man now," and before you're a boy. I think it's a slow process. But if I could identify one part of my life when I really started to take up the mantle of responsibility and change myself, Italy is right up there at the top, I would say.
I'd agree. Yeah. I think a lot of people are looking for that trigger moment into adulthood. Like, now, now I'm going to be adult when I start paying a mortgage or when I get a job. But the truth is that when people start paying a mortgage or start a full 9 to 5 job, they still feel like the same person they were 2 years ago in college or 4 years ago in high school. That's because I think a lot of problems is people looking outside for validation. They look to people reaffirming who they think they are. When what I found with your help and with the help of my friends and things like that is that the validation comes from within. As much as I love you guys as a group of friends, you didn't just slot in where other groups of friends slotted out. You became a support system that lifted me up and helped me realize that I had to have that lift up inside. You know, I've also been thinking a lot about what it means to be a man, but I'm really trying hard not to rely on the perspectives or the outlooks of other people to make that decision. It's a constant battle.
Absolutely. I agree, Jake. I would say the you get to define what it is to be a man to you, right? Nobody else is going. I mean, you can take advice from men and hear what they think it is to be a man and how they became a man, but at the end of the day, you're going to become a man in your own way, and your way is undoubtedly going to be different than everybody else's way, right? and we don't have to restrict it to the male sex if we don't want. We could say, what does it mean to just be an adult? Although I think the tradition, the masculine tradition, is something that has been very scrutinized lately, and it's something that is almost taboo to talk about. It's like, why are we even? I think some people would watch this and question why we're assuming men would interact differently than women at all, or the idea that to be a man is sexist, to act like a man is sexist, and I disagree with those notions, but it's popular. It's something that we have to address. It's something that we have to acknowledge that this is something that is popular, that people have a problem with the idea that of just becoming a man, right? The Disney's remaking that Mulan movie, right? And they have this song in it, "Be a Man," right? I'll make a man out of you. And I'm not even. I think they removed it in the remake because I'm not sure because they canceled the release, and if they didn't, I'm going to eat my words. But I'm pretty sure they were planning on.
That's a top tier Disney song for sure.
Right. Well, it's actually a great song because Mulan is a woman and she's struggling with becoming a man because she's not a man, but she's doing this thing. She's taking responsibility to save her family, which is traditionally something that is the male role in that society, right? To go out and fight war. And she decides to take responsibility on herself and fill these shoes so her dad, who's like crippled and like can't fight, doesn't have to go die because he'll clearly die if he goes out. Milan, a movie that came out 20 years ago, today would challenge these new ideas about the idea of men versus women, and if there isn't even a difference between men and women. So what do you make of that discussion? What, as far as how can we go on in society? Is it possible for us to go on in society with the idea that being a man is no different than being a woman?
Well, I think men face a lot of the problems that women do as well in the modern world. I'm thinking about self-esteem in the social media space. Just as much as women constantly see models and actresses with unattainable standards, men constantly see jacked up, perfectly muscular guys in that exact same media, and it has the exact same effect, especially on the young generations that are going through puberty, where they look at themselves in the mirror and are deeply unhappy, and tons of issues stem from that. As far as specific to Milan, I think back in the 90s, it would be more of like a moderate social message. A man can do it too. A woman can do whatever a man can do. I mean, I don't disagree with that. That's fine. It's pretty. But today, I think that would almost be an insult to the more fringe sections of that same ideology 20 years later, because instead of dissolving the barriers, instead of dissolving the differences and breaking down the things that keep men and women apart, it wants to reinforce them and just flip the dichotomy the other way. So those same barriers that were being fought against by 20 years ago are now reappropriated in the opposite direction when the barriers themselves are the issue.
That's super interesting. So you mentioned barriers. Are you referring to specifically the barrier between male and female as far as gender roles go?
No, I'm talking more broadly about the division that people fixate on. The truth is that the problems that you and I face, the insecurities, the worries, and the day-to-day problems have been faced by people across national boundaries, across history. So for people to get ultra focused on a specific group and the problems that they face, I think is simplifying the issue and exclusionary to the solution.
So are you referring to specifically to intersectionality as far as the issues with that?
Um, I wouldn't say I know too much about intersectional theory to make a judgment. I know that it's kind of combining multiple movements and talking about the things they have in common, which in in theory I completely agree with, because I think that's the point of this podcast, as you and your brother talked about in episode 1, is bridging those divides, talking about what we have in common and what we can work together to solve.
So the reason I mention intersectionality is because this is the idea that we can split off individuals into these subcategories, and that the subcategories range from sex and age and skin color. So in social justice intersectional theory, certain people are at the top of the hierarchy based on their skin color, and based on their sex, not based on them as an individual, right? So, for example, because my skin is white and because I have male genitalia and I'm not identifying as anything other than male, and I'm attracted to women, right? That puts me in the bottom of this hierarchy of oppression by default. Not looking at anything to do with my life experience or anything like that. Whereas if you take a woman with black skin color and she was transgender, and she's also attracted to women, so she's gay, that puts her more at the top of the pyramid of oppression. And maybe she's Muslim too, or something like this. So it doesn't, you're not looking at her individual personality or her life experience. You're looking at the person based on something you would know about them just by looking at them, right? Or just by what they identify with. And I think there's a lot of problems with that theory. What's interesting is that although I think intersectionality is very toxic and dangerous today, I still very much identify with some of my groups. Specifically, I think that skin color is really arbitrary. I don't care what skin color you are. I don't think it has anything to do with who you are as a human being. So I think it's irrelevant, and I think it's I think it's a boring topic, honestly. But some people think it's the most important thing in the world, which is, to me, racist. But it's boring to me. Something that is actually rooted in science, something that we can trace, is people's biological sex, people's what was traditionally called gender. So I really identify with being a man, and I identify with being a human as well. But I've found that the more I live by traditional male values, the more my life makes sense, in a way that when I look at traditional female values that work for a lot of women, I don't think that would work for me. Does that make sense, Jake?
Yeah, but could you expand a little bit more?
Sure. So I think that today, the idea that there is a traditional male value that men should attain is taboo. Because when you look at somebody, let's say we all know somebody who's a man or a woman who doesn't fit the stereotypical man or woman, right? Maybe the man isn't big and muscular. He's small and scrawny, and he's not interested in things that men are typically interested in, right? And so for him, he's saying, well, why are you telling me to be a man when this doesn't even reflect who I am inside, right? I've never thought of myself this way. And look, you can be small and scrawny and still be a man. That's not the point. I'm just saying, if you take somebody that has male genitalia and is a man, but doesn't necessarily think of themselves as fulfilling that male stereotype or archetype, the whole thing theoretically falls apart. Because what an intersectional person would do, or what a postmodernist would say, is that, look, because you're trying to tell people to uphold this model of being a man, you're dispossessing people who that model doesn't apply to. The issue is that the people that the model doesn't apply to are a fringe of the population. We're talking about in the single digit percentiles in each sex. But they exist, so it's not like we can ignore them, right? So what we need to do, in my opinion, is make a place in society where we uphold these traditional values, but also have room for people to say, hey, if the traditional male value doesn't work for you, go pursue something else. But don't tear down the traditional male value, because there's a reason it's there. It's worked for tens of thousands of years. These traditional values don't just spring up out of nowhere. There's a reason for them, right? And I think that
Right.
actually before this podcast, I was really thinking. I was like, what would I like to talk with Jake about? Well, I'd like to talk to him about the value of tradition. Why should we have tradition at all? So first, I guess I'll just throw it back to you to respond to what I just said, and then speak a little bit about what is the value of tradition, if any.
I personally see a lot of value in tradition. And like you said, it exists for, and it's rooted in thousands of years of writings and history. I do want to be ideologically consistent with what we are talking about at the beginning of the conversation about determining what's best for you, seeking that validation from yourself, and acting on it, and having the self-discipline to continue working on it throughout your life. So I don't want to substitute one ideal or attack on an ideal for another. I still believe that every person should determine what it is to be an adult, or what it is to be a man, especially for themselves, and act on it. The issue is, at its core, attacking on a societal level other people's definitions of that same thing. If you have the right to subvert that tradition, then that's fine if you want to do it individually and you're not harming anyone. But when it becomes a pressure or a peer pressure on a societal level to do the same for other people, then it's going to have impacts that web out from there. And I'm pretty sure every single person would have their own twist or individual quirk on what it means to be a man. For me, it's a lot about responsibility and self-assuredness.
Absolutely. And I would say it's just so difficult now, because it kind of like exactly what you said. I think it's fine on the individual level. If a man or a male decides, hey, like, this traditional archetype of what it is to be a man doesn't fit my life, and that's fine. More power to you. If that's not what works for you, go do what works for you, right? I think it's actually tyrannical to say, do this thing that doesn't work for you, right? But also, can we acknowledge that this works for the majority of men? If it didn't, then it wouldn't be there. It's not just there to oppress people, right? It's not just there to be something that is tyrannical. Although that element is in there, right? So I guess it goes. This is a modern conception. So a lot of times now, and I'm not a man's rights activist, by the way. I find the same issues with them as I do with feminists. I don't consider myself in any of those groups. So something that you'll hear like men's rights activists and even feminists say is that men need to be more allowed to express their emotions, and they need to be more sensitive, and they need to be allowed to cry. And this is going to be controversial, but I kind of disagree that men need to embrace sensitivity. And I think that they should be allowed to. I don't think that it should be shunned. And let me explain my reasoning. I think that in my experience, when I've gotten emotional, it hasn't actually benefited me. It's actually done the opposite. It's made me make poor decisions. It's made me do a lot of things that I wouldn't want to do rationally, right? And later I end up regretting. Now, this doesn't mean that for a woman or for somebody else, they can't be emotional. I'm saying for me. So I think the idea that men need to be emotional like women is against their nature. Men express their emotions in different ways than women. For women, it seems to be more oriented towards sadness. And for men, it seems to be more oriented towards anger. When I get emotional, the first reaction I come to is anger, right? And I think it's fair to say for an average woman, the first emotion they come to when they experience a radical emotion would be sadness. It doesn't mean they can't experience anger, and I get sad a lot of times too. Yeah, if you want to respond to that, go ahead. I'm not dying on this hill. This is just an inkling that I have.
No, I think it's something worthy to explore. I think the modern world has a very complicated relationship with emotion, and I personally am pretty on the fence. Almost every headline or advertisement or social media post appeals on a basis of emotion, which is just a cracked and broken foundation to develop an actual legitimate and logical, political or otherwise, opinion. But I do think that the way society teaches men to express emotion can be harmful in some ways. I know that I've personally have had struggles with bottling up emotions, and I'd rather express them openly and healthily than bottle them up and have them explode later. So that's something I've worked on personally. I can speak about my struggles with frustration where I'll just get in this vicious cycle where every little thing starts to bother me and then I erupt over something small. Whereas what there's two possible solutions for that is have better self-discipline within my mind to squash the cycle before it gets out of control, or to express it and have open communication with the people who are bothering me in a way that isn't over the top or giving in to the worst instincts of that emotion. So, I mean, we as humans are emotional beings. It's impossible to shut that down. It just needs to be controlled internally or externally. I prefer the internal approach, but when those, when your nerves get thin, as they have been for most everyone these past months, then we do lash out. We do things we regret, and after that, it ceases being an internal problem beyond what can I do to not make this happen again. And it's more of a open communication about how you're feeling and why you're feeling it with the people around you, often the people you love, so that similar things don't happen again. Now, people have been cooped up and anxious for months. I mean, I'm sure there's been lots of family and couple arguments as a result of COVID that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And it's really sad because as a society, we're kind of in a pressure cooker of emotions with all the chaos of the modern world pressing in with no outlet to go outside, hang out with friends, even watch sports on TV. So I think it's really a societal reckoning with the power emotion holds over us. And people seem to, when they fail, default to either sheer anger at everything around them, um, anger at political leaders, anger at the establishment, or just fatigue. People are just tired. The jokes about 2020 being chaotic are like a symptom of this fatigue. Do not want to wake up and see another headline that makes them angry because their emotional reserves are gone. And I think that's because they don't have the self control to an extent to not let out those emotional reserves at every little thing. You have to pick your battles in the modern world or you'll go insane.
I agree. I agree completely. I would just say that I would never advocate that people should. My my issue with the modern movement is that they're asking men to express their emotions in a way that the same way that women do. Men need to express their emotions and then need to take care of their emotions, but they need to do it in their own way, and it needs to be in a healthy way. For example, oh, I think we went offline again. Can you still hear me,
I
Jake?
can hear you. Yes, I can.
Let's see if it reconnects. We just have to wait. Okay, I think we're back. Yeah, we're back. Um, so I would just say that men need to find a healthy way for them to express their emotions. And honestly, for me, it's meditation, it's internal reflection, it's exercise, it's it's a lot of things that are more internal and more, I'd say, stoic than lashing out, right? if you tell young
Right.
men that they need to express their emotions more, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of people lashing out, and you don't want people lashing out because that just exposes a symptom, but it doesn't actually solve the issue of the turmoil that's going on inside. Men need to figure out how to do this, and I think a big issue is the traditional role of the man is being challenged in society, as far as saying, no, you don't have to take responsibility. You don't have to do things men traditionally do. I think the sanity and the happiness of man is at stake. If I didn't, like, I work a lot and I take a lot of responsibility and I'm very disciplined. I do these things to keep me sane, right? When I don't do these things,
Right.
I'm a miserable mess. My girlfriend doesn't understand it, my mom doesn't understand it. My sister doesn't seem to understand it. Like, they have different views, and that's okay. And they do what they can do in their life. But for me, I think it's hard to convey that if I didn't do these things, this is who I am. Like, this isn't some random, or this isn't some like pre-contrived system I'm following that is outdated and doesn't need to be followed. Right? This is actually me deciding, hey, I'm going to do something for my life and take this responsibility and try to be the best man I can be. And this actually, oh, what do you know? I'm happier. I'm healthier. I feel better. I seem to be smarter. I seem to be interacting in the world better. All these benefits from following this model. By reading Marcus Aurelius and saying, oh, this is what this great man did. Or looking at a lot of other model men and seeing what they did in a way that I relate to a lot more than, let's say, conventional feminine wisdom, although that's equally valuable. It's just not something that's as valuable to me personally, like in my life. Does that make sense, Jake?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. And I think the security that you described is something that's very sadly rare in the modern world. I've also found a lot of value from Stoicism and Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus. Those are the big three. And a lot of it is focused on that emotional control, which the outlets you described, such as exercise and self-reflection, are something that I think anybody should use. But yeah, the emotion, the vast amounts of emotion today is at odds with our lack of an emotional intelligence as a society. You know, you go to school to gain to grow your intellect, to gain skills, to grow professionally after you go to school. But not a lot of people grow beyond that basic teenager level of being angry when something frustrated happens,
Yes,
being
exactly.
sad when something sad happens, and oversharing, overdoing, and indulging yourself in basically your own impulses.
Mm. Yeah, I would say that is actually what some people would say. Oh, men are cruel because they just get angry. I would say that's being a boy. That's not being a man. A man, I would say, knows how to control his anger and redirect it for good. Somebody who doesn't control their anger, I would argue, isn't actually being a proper man, right? That's part of that is being able to control those emotions and say, look, this doesn't it.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm pissed, right? But I'm going to redirect this into something more valuable for me, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean I need to
Right.
go cry in my closet for 20 minutes to express that, although it may. Um, but there's a variety of many strategies I can do to deal with that. And I dealt with anger like this for a long time. And although sometimes I feel like I'm bottling up emotions and then I need to express them, and I will cry or I will do something else or I'll really just let it go. But generally, it feels like a very healthy way. It doesn't like I go around thinking, oh, don't be sad, don't do this, don't do that. It's like, no, my mind's not even going there, right? It's
Exactly.
you just learn to be more objective as a person and to be more flatlined and ride the emotional highs and then try to mitigate the emotional lows and not express them on other people, right?
It's yeah, that's a great point, Colton. It's not about quashing anger or sadness as you feel it. It's about mitigating the situations from which anger or sadness would arise, where they don't get the reaction out of you that they would have before. And that's just part of the quest for self-improvement. I think there's nothing sadder than somebody who just doesn't want to improve themselves, because it's the lifelong struggle. I personally write down or journal about what I feel are like the 5 wedges of my life, which is physical, mental, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. And I try to track my growth or problems in all those sectors um, on their own. But after I've tracked them all, I look at them all together and see where success in one area might actually be hurting another area, to make sure I'm the most well-rounded person and that I'm on a solid trajectory in everything that's most important to me.
That's actually, I really like that, the 5 wedges. Those are, it seems to be, that's like a very profound way of looking at it, that you have these 5 independent nodes that you need to take account for, which seems like really, I really like that, sort of taking account for your entire life. And it seems to me that I like, look, I think not doing self-transformation seems like it's the easier path, right? It seems like, oh, I don't need to improve myself. I don't want to improve myself. Improving myself is work. I'll just not do that, right? I'll skip out on that. It's actually harder in the long run, because when you improve yourself and you take the big leap, and it's hard to improve yourself, but it makes your life easier, right? You work out. What does working out do? It makes you stronger. What's the result of being stronger? It makes things easier. Now when I go and run 5 miles, because I do it all the time, it's easier than if I was out of shape, right? So
Right.
it makes life easier, but you have to go through the hard things first. That's a masculine ideal, I would argue, is doing the hard things so that things are easier later. Delayed gratification, something that I'm going to sacrifice the present for the future. And you build and you build and you build. It's like a big ladder you're climbing. And then it's not, you don't notice it after a day, the results. You notice it, you look back at yourself from a year ago, 5 years ago, and you say, damn, I can't believe I was living like that. You can't just snap your
And then you
fingers.
could look back at yourself today
Yes.
in 5 years and be, damn, I can't believe I was living like
Exactly. There's not like a, oh, I'm gonna get to this point and then I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna relax and do nothing. That's a fallacy to me, because the journey of improving is what life is about, right? There is no end point. You stop improving when you die, right? That's what the mentality should be. It doesn't have to be physical. I'll read another book. I'll be learning more constantly. That's what education's about. Imagine how stupid we'd all be if we didn't receive some sort of education. Like, we take it all for granted that we know that how many that there are 8 planets in the solar system, and that and we know about evolution, and we know all these things. We take these things for granted, but this is not. These are things that took man and humankind thousands of years to discover and cultivate. These are things we take advantage of. Like, the whole journey of humankind is about improvement. So to exempt yourself from that is naive, and I think you'll end up being miserable if you do that, right?
Yeah. In terms of legacy, I'd be happy if I could contribute to that in any small way. Just like thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of man hours towards writing and thinking and researching and discovering are at my fingertips, can I contribute some of my hours and some of my work to future generations?
Exactly. There's the great man theory of history, which has been scrutinized, but I think it's got some definite foundations in truth. The great man theory of history is that every once in a while a great figure emerges from history and just defines an era, like Napoleon or Julius Caesar. And the culture revolves around this great person. Like Genghis Khan is a good example of that. Um, Another argument would be the environmental argument that the environment creates that person. So it doesn't even, the great person isn't that much is more important than the environment that creates him. It's like a chicken before the egg sort of thing. It doesn't matter. They're both important. But the idea that you're leaving this lasting impact, right? You feel like you just want to contribute, right? That's a feeling that not everybody, I think a lot of people have, but today people are saying, "Oh, I don't need to have that," right? Or it'd be easier
Right.
if my life didn't have that. It's like, do you really want to be on your deathbed looking back at your life and saying, "I contributed nothing to society. I was hedonistic and I just took
No.
pleasure wherever I wanted, but I didn't actually give anything back. The world's not a better place because of me." Like, do you want to look back at that? And if you say yes, then I would argue that that's a really problematic line of thinking. But if you say no, then it's like, okay, where do you go from here? Well, how do you make the best impact possible? It's not, as some people would say now, by going out and doing. It's not necessarily going out into the world right away, right? It's about building yourself up so that when you do go out into the world, your impact is far greater. If you go into the world now, before you begin your self transformation journey, the impact you're going to have is significantly less. You might not even be ready for that, right? Julius Caesar didn't just become born and then become emperor of Rome or first dictator of Rome, right? Not even the first dictator of Rome. I'm messing up my history, but he didn't he didn't end the Roman Republic by doing nothing, right? He basically worked for years and years and years, and we have accounts of what he was doing, but this stuff was mostly unnoticed to people. They had to ride along the waves and build himself up and build up himself up all the time, knowing that he wanted this great career and having these great aspirations. And then when the time came, he was so well equipped because of the tools he had that he was able to spring forward and make a difference. But people nowadays, I feel like, I don't even like talking like that. It makes me sound like I'm a grandpa. But not people nowadays. But I feel like a lot of people would like to skip those steps. I'm just going to go out and change the world now. I just graduated. I could say that. I just graduated college. Um, I'm 22 years old. I'm ready to change the world, and everything should run the way I think it should run because I've been on this world long enough. I know what things should do, and this is my line of thinking. And like, okay, but you don't really have any. I don't really have enough life experience to say how the world should be necessarily. I need to go through the trials and the tribulations in order to achieve that. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I think if you sit any one person and ask them, do you want to contribute to society? They'd say yes. Just like everyone is the hero of their own story and justifies everything they do by that level. But they see changing society as such a great thing, when in reality, I found that it's just the summation of a bunch of small actions.
Mm.
So people are off put with, what they see as an unattainable goal, making a difference. It's something we all want to do, but not many people could tell you exactly how to do it. And like you said, it takes years of work. It takes the right people around you, the right counsel, and being the right counsel for others. It takes self-discipline and inspiring other people through that same self-discipline.
Absolutely.
The great man theory is really interesting. I'd push even farther against in the environmental factor, because Some of these people rose from literally nowhere and nothing and overcame their environment. And because they overcame their environment, they had the special tools to enact even greater change. So it almost reverses and goes even more into the gray man theory, because the right individual with the right tools and the right amount of work can move worlds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that the name great man theory just alone makes people, a lot of contemporaries, cringe and but it's when you look at the foundation of society, it really is a summation of great people making a great impact and doing things that we can't even conceive of. And we study these people and we build statues for them and we commemorate them because they're inspiring and they're an ideal. When I go and I look at a statue of Theodore Roosevelt, I say, that's a person I want to be like. He made an impact, right? I'm aspiring to be like him. Does that make sense? Because he did something incredible. He did many things that were incredible. And they made a statue out of him because he did these incredible things. Not just to honor him, but to inspire people. Right? That's how societies are built. They're built on the backs of giants. Right? Everybody's riding on the back of a giant, even if they, just the fact that you were educated is you're riding on the shoulders of giants. Now, what do you want to do from there? You can do nothing and just accept you're just going to benefit from all these other things, or you can become a giant of yourself and further the cycle. So it goes back to my discussion yesterday. That's why I think tearing down these statues is reprehensible, because you're basically taking out the ideals of society and critiquing them based on their flaws, when everybody's human. Everybody has flaws, right? Actually, seeing that these people have flaws is more inspiring because I have flaws. That, like, if they didn't have flaws, I can't attain that level, right? That makes it impossible. You can't become flawless. You can't become God. So them having flaws
the understanding of these figures is almost flawed in itself, because they're seen more as ideals than regular human beings like you and me. They faced the exact same worries and anxieties and problems that we do, and they overcame.
Exactly. I mean, they faced harder times. They were living in times. I mean, we're living in the best time in the history of human race, right? The people we have statues of, they had much harder circumstances, and they became these great figures. So it really explains to me, it's like there's no excuse why that can't be me, given how much I have that they didn't, right? And that mentality is not going to be possible when we're tearing pages out of the history books that aren't politically correct or that we don't like. No, we should be highlighting the ones we don't like. What do you mean? What's the whole point?
Otherwise, people will make the exact same
mistakes. Yes. What are we going to tear down Auschwitz? Shouldn't we know what we should avoid? Right? And I know a lot of people have been to Auschwitz, and it's been like one of the most powerful and impactful things that have ever happened in your whole life. They can feel the energy of that place. It's terrible. It's evil, right? If you don't know what evil is, how are you not going to repeat that same evil? Now, does this mean that we should be celebrating moral ideals of the past that we don't disagree with, like slavery? No, absolutely not. We've come to a new place. We have new modern moral conceptions, right? Why can't we accept the fact that our moral conceptions are different than people from the past? And hell, we can even condemn those parts of them. We can even say, at this time, slavery was acceptable, and that's morally reprehensible to me. That's perfectly fair to say. What's not fair to say is that I'm going to judge this person's character based on the moral conceptions at the time of what was acceptable, right? Nobody's building statues of Jack the Ripper, because when Jack the Ripper killed all those women in London, it wasn't acceptable. He was a criminal. That was wrong at the time, right? So we're not even judging him by our modern moral conceptions. He was evil at the time. He's still evil. But now what we're doing is we're bringing our modern morals into the past, which is super dangerous and not something you should do in history ever. They didn't even have a conception of what our modern morals are. They laid the foundation for our modern morals, but they never even considered it being any other way to the level we do. It's unfair of us to say, like Genghis Khan, you could say that guy was very evil. He was probably very evil. He killed probably millions of people. He raped tons of women. He burned cities to the ground, right? But in his culture, at his time, that is what they did. And no doubt Genghis Khan was a genius. No doubt he was an incredible tactician. No doubt he made a bigger impact in the world than 99.99999% of people who've ever lived. He's in like the upper echelon. He's like top 10 most influential people of all time, right? That's undoubtable. Right? We can say that without saying did was good or we need more people like this, right? That what he did was okay. We don't have to say that. We can still acknowledge this man was great. And great's an interesting term, but we can still say that this was a great man because of what he accomplished without necessarily saying it's something that we would do.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I personally have some conflicting opinions about, some of the U.S. Army bases that are named after Confederate generals. Not because they were named such when the Confederacy was happening, but far after the fact. And the fact that they were criminals in their time by our government, treason. And I'm just trying to run down what you were just saying in this particular case that I personally
with the
have had
statues
trouble
today.
puzzling out on my own. No, specifically the U.S. Army bases named after Confederate generals.
Like Robert E. Lee and things like that.
Or more obscure ones like Fort Bragg or Fort Hood. I think that meaning, basically, I don't think 10 years ago, maybe you would know who Hood or Bragg was. So it's become into the forefront, even though that meaning may have been lost through history. But to name a base after an enemy combatant, we wouldn't have one named after.
Are these forts in the north or the south?
In the south, and they were named they were named after the Confederacy.
Well, to the south, probably the time that was named, that those weren't enemy combatants, right? Their view of, and I'm not a fan of Confederacy, and I'm not a fan of that movement at all. But to them, that wasn't like them saying these are enemy combatants, right? This was them saying we want to. What they would say is that we want to honor our heritage, and that might be true. That might be bullshit. Clearly, the problem with the Civil War statue specifically is more problematic. I think it's pretty agreeable to 90% of the population that tearing down a statue of Ulysses S. Grant or Theodore Roosevelt or George Washington or Jefferson it's inexcusable. It's so wrong. I can't even discuss it without getting upset, right? But when we look at the Confederate statues, there's a different argument to be made, and I have a different opinion. So, first of all, the biggest error people are making is assuming that one, this is a Confederate statue, therefore this must represent slavery, or this must represent X or Y or Z. Two, other people are making the assumption that these are purely on the other side, people are saying these are purely historical monuments that are celebrating heritage that have nothing to do with slavery. So both these assumptions are wrong. One, because Civil War was fought over slavery, the state's rights to own slaves specifically. And Two, many of these statues and forts, as you noted, were put up well after the Civil War was over. Now, here's the thing. I still don't want the statue torn down because it's a historical monument. If people decide that this statue is bad, I think it should be democratically said, we don't want the statue up anymore. That's fine. Have a vote, take it down. Ripping it down, committing acts of public violence, that's not acceptable. They're doing it against people that they don't even understand. Robert E. Lee is a great example. Now, Robert E. Lee defended the Confederacy and therefore defended the idea of slavery. To many people, that's already over the line. But they don't actually know who Robert E. Lee was, really. Robert E. Lee, despite that, was basically against slavery in his own opinion. He fought for the Confederacy because he was from Virginia. He didn't really have a choice. He was going to have to fight for the Union or the Confederacy. If he fought for the Union, he'd have to kill his own family members and people from Virginia, which is where he was from. So he decided to fight for the Confederacy, to defend those people. Abraham Lincoln actually invited him into a meeting in the White House and asked if he would be the general of the Union, and he declined on the basis that he was a Virginian, even though he conceded the point that he wasn't even for slavery. Now, what he did is still went and defended slavery. That's wrong, right? But undoubtedly, he was the most brilliant general in the Civil War, maybe second to Grant, but I would argue that Robert E. Lee was superior to Grant with what he did. So from a historical standpoint, this is like a great person. Like, this person is not great morally. I'm not saying that. He's an outstanding individual for what he's able to accomplish militarily, from what he was able to do. And when you take the fact that this person was sort of kind of compelled to fight for the Confederacy, like many people were. Many were drafted. 90% of the Confederacy, I think 95% plus of people in the South didn't own slaves because they couldn't afford them, and they were drafted to fight for property of the wealthy elites in the country. And they might have still, a lot of them, been racist. Plenty of them, most of them, most certainly were, and most certainly were for slavery. But this is the thing. Are we really going to demonize a statue of a 17-year-old person who, let's say there's these statues that are commemorating Confederate losses or people who died fighting for the Confederacy, people who were 16, 17 years old. Are we really going to demonize these people who were drafted in the military before they could even think properly at 16 years old on the basis of our modern presumptions? Now, maybe we should, but this should at least be a discussion.
I couldn't agree more about that last point. The fact that it's a complex issue that is being approached in a way that is so simplistic is the root of the problem. There isn't an easy answer, and that's good because there are no real easy answers in political issues or in life. Yeah, the fact that a lot of these statues were voted to be put up during like the voting rights movement, the civil rights movement, as just a reactionary assault, things like that should be taken into account. But also the fact that fallen soldiers' monuments being desecrated, that shouldn't sit right with anyone.
No.
And this fixation, this eternal fixation and obsession with the mistakes of the past really take away from the mistakes of the present. Because I'm a foreign policy guy. Slavery hasn't been defeated. Slavery exists in the world today. Right now, there's literal slave trades in the Middle East and Northern Africa. And there's still servitude, unpaid servitude, through the American prison system. These are problems that exist today. But by punishing and fixating on the past, we're not making any steps in the right direction on those.
I'd agree, and I'd even go further to say that I want those statues up to know what we should avoid. In the same way, Like, I don't want them to take Auschwitz down, right? It goes
Right.
back to that point. It's like, why are we trying to forget this divisive part of our history? We overcame this evil. It was defeated. Confederacy's not around. Sorry for anybody who believes that it will come back. It won't. Slavery is abolished from this nation. It's been abolished, and that was a great victory morally, right? It's a great victory for our country to stay united. And just like Auschwitz, you can't erase that part of our history because it makes you uncomfortable. Now, these statues aren't. It's not like Auschwitz is like. There's a difference in some ways because it's not like Auschwitz. It's saying we commemorate these brave SS soldiers who stood on these guard towers. No, that's not what Auschwitz is saying. And these Confederate statues seem to be glorifying these people, some of the people who are, I'd admit, were heinous individuals they were probably brutal chattel slave owners. But it's so much more nuanced than just getting angry, having a rudimentary understanding of history, not even sub-rudimentary understanding of history, where you know about 2 sentences about the Civil War, and then deciding that you're going to tear down every Civil War monument around, including the ones of Ulysses S. Grant, including Confederate soldiers and captains who defected from the Confederacy and actively fought it, and served with the Confederacy for a month, and then decided that they'd rather fight for the Union and that slavery was wrong. Yet they're tearing down that person's statue. That month of servitude is unredeemable for them, even though they were probably drafted. it's I mean, how long until we start? It's already happening. I mean, like, what they're tearing down World War II monuments. It's just anything that represents anything about history is being desecrated. Reminds me, George Orwell warned in 1984. The first thing you want to do is destroy a people's history. You destroy people's history, they lose their conception of who they are, and then you can mold it to whatever you want, right? So it's very intentional what they're doing. They're trying to destroy the American ideal, and they're trying to start a revolution.
Yes. I think censorship of textbooks in particular is the line. That will be the line that cannot be crossed for a just and informed society. And while I've certainly had biased presentations of history in my educational experience, I haven't had straight up lies in a textbook.
It's happening.
And I think that
it's been happening. I hate to cut you off, but I just got my degree in history. It's already revisionist. It's been taking place. The People's History of America. I forget who the author is. I'll look it up. But the People's History of America was written, and the History's People of the United States by Howard Zinn is basically a revisionist piece of history that aims to put the founding fathers in this terrible light, and that everything about America was about oppressing people and doing all these things, and basically undermining every single fact. And look, I'm for a balanced approach, right? Like, the evils of the past, such as slavery and the massacre of the Native Americans, the 2 greatest sins this country committed, shouldn't be erased or shouldn't be forgotten. Those should be maybe even at the forefront of some mistakes that we need to learn from. But then to say
yes,
that therefore, because George Washington killed Native Americans, or in the French Indian War, to think that makes him evil, or to think that nullifies the great accomplishments he did for this country, is insane. And if anybody would like to find a historical figure for me that doesn't have a serious flaw, it seems to be that every major historical character that made it big had some serious flaws. It almost is like required, because to be a human being, you have to have serious flaws. Like Gandhi even has many things that were very problematic about the way he did things, and or like things he carried on in his own life. I heard like he might have been beating his children and things like that. It's okay. So I haven't confirmed that, but let's just say Gandhi beat his kids, right? Something that today in our country we would say is bad. Okay, Gandhi beat his kids. Therefore, oh, he's a terrible person. Therefore, him liberating an entire subcontinent peacefully and doing everything he did for the Indian people and spurring on the modern nonviolent movement is nullified. He's a bad guy. No, wrong.
Yeah.
Wrong. You can't look at history that way. You're gonna be sad. You're gonna be very sad to find that all your favorite historical figures have done something wrong. We need to accept this. We have accepted it. Let's like Winston Churchill, another great example, Jake. They're trying to tear down a statue in London right now of the man who is single-handedly probably the reason we aren't all speaking German right now. Right? This guy stood up to Hitler when everybody else said not to. He said this guy's evil. Hitler's evil, and we need to stop him. And we, under no circumstances, will we would negotiate with them or surrender to them. If he didn't make that decision, how different is the world today? How many more Jews would have been killed in the Holocaust? How many more people would have died under Nazi's regime? Okay? Yet, yeah. Winston Churchill's also responsible for a mass starvation of India during the war when he didn't allocate resources there properly, and it resulted in the deaths of a lot of people in India. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Like, he's responsible for that. Okay, so how do we balance these two things? They have to be balanced. You look at it in a nuanced way. You look at it in an objective way. You can look up to Winston Churchill because he did all those great things, and also say, yeah, but I still think what he did in India was reprehensible. I still think Gallipoli was a disaster and he made a mistake. But yet, tear down a statue. No. Absolutely not.
And this societal view of guilt and responsibility boils down to the individual, because, you know, a lot of people just think that one bad thing, they think that bad things cancel out good things. But that's not how it works. If someone embezzles $2 million and donates $2 million, they go to jail for embezzlement. Because the two have to exist side by side in a nuanced, moderate view of the world. And it's easy to have that teenager child brain want everything to be easy, want everything to be black and white, but it's not. It's just not. And the sooner that people recognize that and act on it in a mature, less emotion-fueled way, then the sooner the extremism in society will be healed. Everyone's like, oh, the division, but they contribute to the division every single day through their actions and words, especially on things like social media where everything's pushed to the extreme. You know, two people like you and I can have a discussion, but in a broader arena, our voices are drowned out. So that's why I think what you and your brother talked about, bridging the gap with this podcast, is just essential, because people are afraid to have these discussions. And a society that's fearful of asking the hard questions, of tackling difficult and sensitive topics, is completely under-equipped for the next disaster. Because there are disasters on the horizon. There's foreign powers that seek to undermine us. There's ecological disasters that could happen. There's natural disasters waiting in the wings. And of course, the pandemic has revealed those same cracks in society. And rather than come together as a people, we've just been so pushed to the extreme. People are scared, confused. And I think a lot of this historical perspective can be applied, this minimalist historical perspective can be applied to almost everything else. It's more of a symptom than it is the root issue. It's a very damaging symptom, though.
That's really interesting. In my head I was relating it to the whole thing, but I really like the way you just said that, because people aren't looking at history with a nuanced way in the same way they're not looking at life in a nuanced way. They're not looking at any viewpoint in a nuanced way. They're just deciding to take this divisive stand, good and bad, like the tribalistic. Or let's just take something. This is something funny. The orange man bad phenomenon, right? Where
Yeah.
Which is something that moderates and conservatives say to make fun of left leaning people who just wait for Trump to do anything, and then they just say, "Oh, orange man bad," right? And so, and it can go on the other way, true, because when you look at a Trump supporter, and I know several very strong Trump supporters, it doesn't matter what he does. It's like the opposite. It's like orange man good, no matter what, right? It's and so it's like, okay, well, clearly everything Trump has ever done is not bad, all right? If you think that, I don't know what to say to you. That's not even possible. Also, it's impossible. He's not Jesus. Okay, even Jesus had his moment where he had to reconcile the sins of mankind. So, he's not God, right? He's a man, so he can't be impenetrable. He can't be this like omniscient figure that these Trump supporters seem to think he is sometimes. So like, what's the solution? You have to meet somewhere in the middle there, right? It's if you're gonna have a rational viewpoint of this, you have to go between the devil and God, right? Because he's not the devil and he's not God. So where is he? Maybe he's really close to the devil, and you could make a lot of great arguments like Hitler's there or something like that. Maybe he's right next to Hitler, and that still seems absurd to me, but that's a better argument. Or maybe he's just Moses. He's not quite God, but he's like the next best thing. He's like right up there. Now you're getting a little bit more reasonable. It's still insane, but look, it's not possible for one side of this political issue or any issue to be 100% wrong. If there's 50% of the population believes something, the odds that they're completely wrong is zero. It's zero. Like there's something in there that's true. You could take any issue, and it's each side has a point.
A democratic society needs to reckon with the opinions of its people. To dismiss someone because they disagree with you is to basically spit in the face of Athens and the foundation of democracy.
Exactly.
It's discussions like this that expand minds, change minds, or don't change minds. It just matters that you can have a reasonable discussion. I know I don't have all the answers, but it seems like a lot of people think they do.
Yeah, I mean,
and that must be very comforting. Must be very comforting in the modern world. I feel like I know everything. I have all the answers, and this is how I'm coming down on it.
It's not comforting. It's not. They're miserable.
It's a false comfort.
It's not based in truth.
Easy answer.
Yeah. But they're angry because they're trying to explain the world in this narrow viewpoint. For example, if you believe everything Trump does is bad, you're going to start seeing all the bad in everything he does, right? So in one sense, you're comforted because you're validated by your belief, but on the other side, you're living a lie because you're not looking at it objectively. You're not being unbiased, and so deep down, a lot of these people I think are not happy because how can you be when you're being pathologized by an ideology that's making you believe lies?
How can you be as right? You take a modern person and they have a handful of disease and issues like mental health, and mental health has risen to the forefront. I mean, if mental health rises, wouldn't that be a sign that society as a whole has a mental illness of its own? like cells of a single organism all getting sick. It's almost depressing, but I know that there's a solution. It's not an easy solution, but it's a solution that's going to have to work because it's the only path towards normalcy. And every age and generation has its crisis and is judged by further generations by how they handle that crisis. Will the early 2000s be known as an era of extreme politics or erosion of democracy because of all these easy answers, a philosophical dark age? It's very possible. And that more than anything scares me. That we collectively are taking a step backwards.
I mean, interesting thing is with the progressive movement is it seems to be progressing some things and then clearly regressing others, right? And
Right.
it's total give and take, and I don't think that it's. I go back to the tradition point we made, right? Tradition's immensely important, and a lot of people would disagree with that. A lot of people would say tradition just needs to be overthrown. But you can't have stability without tradition. Tradition provides stability. Tradition is what's been tried and proven. So we can't exactly just take away tradition. But there's also times where tradition can make society stagnant and diminish some groups of people. In that case, it needs to be adapted. It needs to be overcome. So I would say that there has to be, like what we've been saying, a nuanced approach. Can we progress society without abandoning completely tradition? Because a lot of the viewpoint is either we need to keep things the way they were, and we need to go back to the way times were, and like all that, and that's equally wrong with the people who are saying we need to destroy everything with tradition because the way things were was good for some people, but there was segregation and slavery and terrible issues that progression has helped solve. But we can't just get rid of all of our traditions because that's what keeps us stable. Can we just accept the fact that those traditions, our traditions, are here for a reason, and that we might deem the reason isn't good and that we're ready to discard it, but I think there's going to be some traditions that are built into us as humans and that we can't dissipate.
I agree. Yeah, to understand base human nature and to understand what motivates yourself is giving yourself the ability to influence the people around you and understand societal shifts. If you feel like you're being buffeted this way and that, like a storm by modern events, then honestly, the solution isn't external, it's internal, which circles back because we're just talking about one big issue here and all of its different permutations. Tradition is our foundation. Um, it's very important, but people get so greedy in the fast-moving modern world. They want an easy and quick answer when progress, by its very nature, like government, is slow-moving. I mean, would you count the end of the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation as progress? I would, but it took more than 2 years before the Emancipation Proclamation reached every area of the former Confederacy and the last slaves were free. That's 2 years of slavery after that. And then, of course, after Reconstruction, there was Jim Crow. So progress is never an easy answer and it's never a straight line and it's very slow going. That doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to improve or be happy with paltry improvements, but it means that we need to have a little bit more patience for the process. And I think that's something that's really been lost lately.
I think that's a great point to end it on, man. I think that was a remarkable conversation. I'm really happy we had it. And thank you for coming on, man. Anything else you want to say?
Just want to thank everyone for tuning into the live stream. Let you know, Colton, I'll be on it anytime you ask again.
I appreciate it, man. I'll definitely be having you on again in the future. It's been a great talk. But yeah, guys, please, if you like this, like and subscribe, and let me know. And if you disagree, please leave a comment. Tell me why you disagree. This is about having a discussion. This is about opening a dialogue between people. I don't think that I'm right in all my positions. It's impossible. I couldn't be. It's not feasible that somebody could be right about everything. I want to be exposed to the points I'm not making well enough. And doesn't mean I'm going to roll over. You have to make a good argument. But please, if you disagree, say something. If you agree, say something as well. Let's have a discourse. Anyway, guys.
I may not disagree with what you say. I may not agree with what you say, but I'll defend to death your right to say it.
That's a great... I love that. And with that being said, guys, let's go disagree out there respectfully. We'll see you all in the next episode.